So I'd love to start off by asking why you joined Climate Cultures.
So I suppose my joining for Climate Cultures goes back quite a long way, when I was part of a wonderful moment. It was at a tipping point conference, and it was called Doing Nothing is Not an Option. And I'm sure many people have already referred to this moment. And it was this kind of extraordinary time where creatives all came together. It felt like, in my case, for the first time in that way, to express their heartfelt concerns for climate crisis, and also how they could bring their voices into the mix. And so when I think of the journey since then, I think that and Mark was instrumental in that, bringing people together. I consider that Climate Cultures and the kind of continuation of this dialogue that many creatives are in feels part of this whole, what I would call like a zeitgeist of our time and a paradigm shift, of which I feel I'm part of. So I guess I locate the whole thing within a wider context, and I like that it has a diverse and imaginative take on the situation we're in, and wants to offer platforms for people, actually, in very accessible ways and provocations.
And I'd love to know, what is your eco art journey? What's brought you to combine? Yeah, right. And what's kind of inspired you to combine art and environmentalism?
Yeah, wow, that's a really big question, isn't it? So I mean, I could go on a very long time about that one, but I guess there are maybe just some key things, and I am going to go back in time a bit because it is where it began, to when I was a kid, actually, and we had the Wombles as our model of eco warriors. And I remember at the time there was this idea that somebody else was going to clean our rubbish up, and it was going to be done by these mythical creatures that would pop up from below the ground.
Right.
And I got very angry at this concept because it became very apparent that there was a disparity between this idea that someone's going to clean our rubbish up and what was really happening. So that seed was sown a very long time ago. And then because of the Wombles, I guess I grew up in a time when there was this recycling ethic going on. And so if I fast forward now further down my journey, I can see that something about the time I grew up in, and then looking now at something like the Red Brigade, which is the XR kind of Creative Commons pool of creativity that comes out into the streets, and it shows us a very different picture. And you have this sort of multi-generational image, young people, old people, etc., all wearing red, demonstrating a kind of a deep despair. So again, the art's being used to draw attention to this disparity between these kind of idealistic ideas about what's going to happen and what's really happened. So I know it's a very long answer, but that's the beginning. And then from that, I've always carried on. I've always had this sort of this kind of approach, if you like. I've always loved the idea of taking something and turning it around, seeing different angles. How can I use this in another way? It's sort of part of how I am. And then another turning point, and I'm using this terminology, happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where I began to talk to other designers in my field, because I'm a theatre designer and artist, about how we could start to incorporate more directly our ecological ideologies to help other people start to kind of see the potential in this area of work in our industry. And this gave birth to eco-scenography, which is where there is an approach, and it's not an aesthetic outcome, it's an approach to creating work in a more joined up way, seeing that our kind of the way we go about making work is as important as the final outcome, and that we all everything affects each other, and it's very much based on that concept that nothing is throwaway. Just because it's out of sight doesn't mean it's gone. So then when I took the title eco-scenography, that was really like a point of activism for me. I wanted to make my activism more visible. And I have a kind of vision at some point in the future that the eco bit will be dropped away, which is why I keep a hyphen in my kind of definition of it, so that actually all scenographic practice, all design practice, all creative endeavours will have ecological thinking as a foundation. And I guess as a final point, I mean, there may be other things I could say, and maybe I could talk about some examples of my work that illustrate this, but I guess there's something really important that I wanted to say, and it's that in my industry, and maybe this could be, you know, rolled out to any other kind of creative endeavors, but I believe that performance makers need to reposition this climate crisis that we're in as an opportunity, and that this is actually our new brief. And I think that is really like, and I think that within that is enormous potential to flourish. But unlike in the past, and I am actually looking at my notes here because there is something there's something here. There is actually a line that I absolutely love, and maybe I'll find it in a minute. But the idea, I suppose, now is that about sort of the mutuality of thriving, that it isn't okay anymore, both personally and globally, from my perspective, and I would imagine lots of people share this, that like there are people that will be sacrificed, or a location will be sacrificed in order that a few people can create something or do something for their own ends.
Yeah, the idea of collaboration rather than competition. So
yeah, but I think digging into that, really digging into what that is, what that means. I mean, I don't know if I entirely know what it means myself, to be honest. It's a word that I have as one of my values. But I guess in all these things, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it's right to investigate what we mean by these statements when we say creativity or sustainability or collaboration. What do we mean by it, and how are we going to engage with that? What does it mean to us? How do we engage with it?
Yeah. Do you have any examples of that kind of thriving? So maybe in the theatre world, or more specifically scenography world, of thriving where both or everyone involved thrived?
I certainly, in my working practice, this is what I'm aiming for. So I do have examples of work that I could just like kind of summarize the kind of approach which this comes from. And just before that, I was just thinking, maybe this is doubling back a bit after that question, but there's something about just understanding. And I'm looking down at my notes here because there is something that is like, I've got these three core values, and I'm just looking at what I mean by these three things, which keeps me grounded. I guess I wanted to kind of go through that and then talk about my examples. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
So yes, I guess for me, it's about keeping what I talked about, the ideals of the Wombles. You know, it's about keeping it's like grounding these ideals into some sort of practical action, because ultimately that's what we need to do, in my opinion. So my three core values is creativity, it being the first, and actually the most important quality in that, weirdly enough or unweirdly, is to cultivate curiosity, and that is my definition of creativity. Sustainability is the other one, and this is very much what I was just talking about. So this is like a holistic approach. So I use this whenever time I'm kind of getting a bit lost. I go, okay, am I on track? So in this situation, it's where the dreamer, this idea of the idealist and the pragmatist will work together. And that is my definition of sustainability, because I believe that is a sustainable way forward. Collaboration is what we were talking about before. And so I've got these things that I try and practice. I don't always manage it. So in collaboration, I think it's active listening. It's kind of developing some sort of openness It's this pooling of expertise, and you could say that climate culture really kind of embraces all these things, and welcoming and honouring diversity. And what I've added to the whole thing, which has come out more recently, is something to do with radical optimism. So this is celebrating and noticing what works and doing more of it. So it's a particular focus. And then if you want me to carry on, unless you've got another question, shall I carry on with a few examples?
Yeah, please.
So I am looking at notes here, mainly because I just wanted to try and be succinct. So so if we look at some of my work, again, I can probably put it into three sections, even though that it overlaps. So I do work where let's say the recycling ethic is completely laid bare. So I will make work where you can see what it's made from.
Right.
There was a project I did at Liberty Festival with a company called D&H Ensemble, and their piece was about, a bit like Wombles, people coming out the ground from a volcano and seeing life afresh. And it explored ideas of belonging and othering, but they were basically using things in everyday life that we would identify in their own way. So you had like bits of hazard tape that were on costume, so like the costumes were made of like things like hazard tape gathered up into a sort of frill, or wearing trousers upside down, or turning a coat inside out, or all this kind of stuff. But you could see so in a way, the thing about that project on reflection, and this is quite sobering, and what I think is a really interesting teaching example, which I sometimes use in colleges when I speak, is that every single thing you can see, including the newspapers that people are using in the show at some point, reading them upside down and playing with them, are all things that you are still trapped in landfill today. So I saw this incredible program some years back called, I think it's a Rubbish History. I may have got the title wrong, but it's basically, they did live, they've excavated landfills live from different historical moments. They went to a 1970s landfill, they dug it up, they had intact children's clothes which were made of synthetic material, fair enough, but this is the sobering thing. That was an 80s one, sorry. They had a 1987 newspaper intact. Now we think paper goes away, right?
Yeah.
You could read everything on it. They read an advert out. So this is kind of like, this is the whole nothing is throwaway. It really like lands when you think in those terms. So there's that kind of, that's being very creative. I'm doing my thing, but I've also got an activist message embedded in the piece of work. If I move on to another example of a piece of work, there's the approach cradle to cradle thinking, which could be defined as a closed loop design.
Okay.
So in this example, which was in particular, I did a show called The Chairs with a company called Extant. Again, it was made from reclaimed and found materials. And I worked directly with a theatre salvage company. And I worked with what I could find, as well as taking a rough model into the actual salvage site itself, to create a kind of environment for the show to take place in, that had interactive elements in it because it was for visually impaired people as well.
Okay.
That toured extensively, actually. Was stored and retoured. So I convinced the company, which is not a bad thing to do, that this was a unique work of art, which it was. I couldn't repeat it. Rather than remaking it for a retour, they stored it. So it was all these objects arranged into this space that I then painted like a giant canvas. So it looked like a dripping research station. Okay. And what is closed loop about it is that everything, it was like 95% of it was all reclaimed. Everything went back to the salvage company at the end. So it got back in. So this is how you could say that these values I'm talking about are kind of coming to life. This mutual thriving. I got 2 more examples. Shall I go on?
Oh yes, please do.
So then there is another approach, but bearing in mind this is all interrelated, and we're talking about systemic thinking all the time. In this. Something I would call the slow art approach. And this couples with the creation of sculptural costumes, props, pieces of art that are made with durability in mind, with the idea that they will not only be, perhaps they have a long life, they might be reused throughout time, but they're also created as objects of beauty that can become part of you know, somebody's decor in their home, which I've used it for, be in an exhibition, be what I would call a performative object. And so this is where there's a lot of crossing over between different disciplines, which I also really love. So this particular one I'm talking about is a project called Orlando. It's a project close to my heart that it still lives with me. I still have thoughts and ideas about it. And it was a sculptural costume that was made with a sort of digitally printed kind of dress part to it, with a sort of 15-meter train, which had lots of imagery on it that was collected through a community project and turned into a timeline that the character wearing the costume walks through time, pulls behind them. That's the premise. It's also a sculpture, so that the performer can walk out of the dress and it stays standing as a sculpture. And it's performed on beaches. So this one has been located more within site specific. It like turns up on a street corner, or I walked over a bridge in it, or a performer has been on a beach with it. So it kind of pops up. So this is more like outdoor arts at the moment, but it could. So this is kind of an example of and it's sort of, and for me, and I'm speaking very personally, I mean, I work with a very, very talented maker to help me. I don't necessarily always make everything myself. She made a beautiful kind of top out of bending thin plywood. So
wow,
lovely objects still, which give me a lot of pleasure actually, and continue to live in different ways. And that's the important thing. So it's viewing the prop, the costume, the objects that we might use as having life, and it sounds a bit strange, but having a kind of not only a chance to carry on living, but also like these materials which are precious, actually honoring them. And yeah,
I think
you know what I'm trying to say.
It reminds me of, I watched a program which sounds similar to what you watched, and it was about these 2 scientists that kind of dug up some landfill rubbish and showed us how intact it still is, and one of them said, you know, plastic is the most amazing material. It is the most, she was so enthusiastic about plastic, and she said it's such a shame that we use it once because it has so much more to give. And I'm not sure, I don't know if everyone would agree, but it kind of, what you said reminded me of that. It's like honoring the material for longer than just 5 seconds or 1 hour or one performance.
I think actually that may be the same, because these scientists that were in this program were so enthusiastic. It does sound like this. It was actually it's one of my favourite documentaries I've ever seen on it. It really affected me. Brilliant. I've got 2 other thoughts to throw into the thing. Well, I've got one past project, and then I was maybe just talk a bit about the current project.
Great.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about a show called Stuck, which was I worked with a company called Hoax, who are an all-female company, and they have a great way of combining sort of clowning, humour, activism, physical theatre, and they're very radical and passionate. So it was on show at the V&A as part of Staging Places exhibition on the designers lead section. And I kind of frame this in terms of being an innovative use of materials, and also how a designer can extend their role into activism. So the show was about 3 people who seemingly are trapped in some kind of subterranean world. Mm-hmm. And so ethically sourcing the materials for this show was very high on my list, and I wanted to create the whole thing out of reclaimed sleeping bags and tents. So with this in mind, I contacted Julie's Bicycle in a bit of a hurry, actually, and found out very last minute there was a clean-up operation going on at Reading Festival, where this was the time when there was people going in for Calais, collecting sort of equipment to ship over to France, and there was like, you know, the Boy Scouts teams went in, everybody was there trying to use this material. So I was very nervous, thinking, oh, it's all going to be gone, it's all going to be gone, there won't be no equipment. And I remember trucking up in a van with my husband and stepping out of the van to look for the stuff, and I was absolutely shocked. I mean, I was just stopped in my tracks, because I was literally looking over this sea, muddy fields and fields and fields of just a sea of abandoned tents, sea of abandoned equipment. And so I was shocked that after the festival so many people had just walked off and left their stuff behind. So we did our thing. I had a particular color scheme. You know, I was looking to create a subterranean world that reflected something of a kind of soft but interesting kind of strata landscape, let's say, you know, something that might emulate rocks or formations. So I had a particular idea of the palette, so I just used that as my selection tool. So I went for the greens, the browns, the greys, and I collected some incredibly good quality equipment left. Oh, wow. I mean, incredible, not just your £20 items, but like really big family tents that were intricately made. Wow. Loads of layers. I also collected sleeping bags with the idea of using them in some way. I didn't quite know yet how, but to use them in some kind of strange survival clothing, because part of the brief was that there were these kind of people going off on an expedition. I mean, it may have changed over time, but that was my initial kind of concept, or an initial brief from the company, actually. So I went back, washed this stuff, went ahead and started to work with it. So what is notable is 2 things. One is that the actual materials themselves and the van hire and the washing, you could say, all happened under £100. Okay. So I got all of that, but the process of using it, i.e. the labour force, the cleaning, all the rest, which was probably not an invisible cost at the time, you could say was not remunerated, which throws up the idea of how budgets in the future might reflect a more ecological approach. So that's something I wanted to just put in. So then the process of using these things became very interesting in themselves, and I designed in 2 ways. One is through exploration of the material, so offering it up, moving it around, being in my studio, doing mock-ups, etc. I also made some little calico figures to explore some of the shapes. So I made little maquettes. I mean, not, again, all very rough, not haute couture or anything. And to say then that the working and creating of the costumes themselves is very interesting. This is something I do want to emphasize here, is that we engaged in a mindful deconstruction of these sleeping bags, and what was really interesting was to understand how much goes in to making one of these objects. Right. In all the minerals that are going into the zips, the different bits of plastic, the toggles. I mean, just to imagine all this, as well as the padded layer, as well as the quilting, as well as kind of ripstop kind of material on top. So I began to research into all this as well. It takes over 200 years for even any of that to start to biodegrade.
Wow. Yeah.
So mindful deconstructing it also gave me clues how to reconstruct it. So how to maintain features in the sleeping bags in order to transform them into these morphic beings. So I ended up with, I suppose, creating a landscape that conveyed a kind of a story of ecological collapse, and creating costumes that could kind of morph between sort of bizarre survival clothing into sort of like almost like early life forms, like a pseudopodia with you know, one leg, or you know, kind of, and eventually they get consumed by the set themselves, so they get kind of eaten by the environment. They kind of become, you know, I don't know what we call it, absorbed.
Yes.
That was the kind of journey of that piece of work. And then from that, because I was, as I said in the beginning, so shocked, I began to talk about it, and I began to discover that there was a whole there's a whole potential yet unexplored, I think, in the theatre industries, where the backstories could be included in programmes, could be more brought out, because it began to really interest people. And subsequently to that, and I'm not saying that I was, you know, responsible for anything, but that this kind of awareness building of lots of different people, and the fact that Judy's Bicycle and Festival Republic, who are another organisation that were connected to the Reading Festival, and other festival producers, and I want to name a really important group of people who've set something up now running for many years called Towards a Greener Festival.
What do you, is that, so that was a previous project, so what are you working on at the moment? Yeah,
so at the moment, and this sort of ties in with another member of Climate Cultures, is I've been working over quite a long period of time now with Jennifer Leach about rider anthems, and we've gone on this, and we are on this quite extraordinary journey, focusing around a project called Duende. So Duende is first of all, just to say, is a Spanish word, and it's very connected to Lorca, who writes and speaks and embodies in his poetry the Duende. And what the Duende is, it is regarded as a heightened state of emotion. It's an authentic expression. It's related to flamenco dance and song, and it's also, the Duende is also a mischievous imp that can enter into spaces and turn things up. So our kind of understanding of it, myself and Jennifer, is it's like a call from the earth, or a call and response. And so with this in mind, our whole project basically orientates around going in search of the Duende in different ways. And we do this, and I suppose actually what I also wanted to say, that the important thing, I think, is that we're going in search of the Duende, but it's within our times of ecological uncertainty. So that is the kind of background, that is the kind of the soil that we're growing our project in. And the project itself will take a hybrid form. It will be the crossing over of all these encounters, these synchronicities, different layers to the project, and it will come out in storytelling, it will come out in myth, in dance, in song, and in imageries that we're going to be drawing from our everyday encounters. And I guess Lorca will be the thread that will connect it all the way through, and we're looking to sort of partner with different groups, and just in the process of exploring that and who these partnerships will be.
All right, brilliant. Okay, so what is your favorite eco art work or project or other practitioner that's really inspired you?
Such a good question. I'm going to say my father.
Okay.
Because not that I can point to anything anybody can see right now, but my father inspired me because he told me a story when he was a boy, rushing when the Sistine Chapel wasn't occupied by anybody. It was empty, nobody ever went, rushing through at the age of 17 into Sistine Chapel just as the sun was coming out, and looking up and seeing the light infusing into the Sistine Chapel and the whole, you know, whole mural of God and Adam. And he said in that moment, not from a necessarily religious perspective, but he understood that the arts were a completely multi-sensory experience. So I would say, taking from that, and then he went on to create, you could say, was a forerunner of quite a lot of multi-sensory art, including in his own fine art, which was very vibrant. And from that, I would say that the kind of art that inspires me is art that moves, or theatre that moves me, that engages all my senses. And I guess to that end, it is quite difficult for me to actually say an artist or a designer. So my feeling is, if I was to take a moment with it, honestly, I think that the endeavours that we all make as humans are fabulous. I actually don't think that anyone's endeavour is less or inspiring or less worth mentioning than somebody else's, because in actual fact, it is for me the coming together of all the facets, of all the visionaries, the creatives, the poets, the dancers, the singers, the writers within the creative industries, and all the people who maybe don't see themselves as creative, but that everybody is creative, that are on a daily basis doing things with the environment in their heart. So the most inspiring thing for me, and the greatest thing I can think of, is nature. I'm working on an initiative with 3 other designers called EcoStage, which will be launching shortly, and it's going to function as a portal to support and share information about sustainable practices in the performing arts industry. On the site, it'll offer guidelines and principles about placing ecological thinking at the heart of your practice, and there's an opportunity to take an online pledge, so you'll be sent a sort of an online logo to use on your paperwork, or to put at the bottom of emails, basically to share your commitment to an ecologically minded practice within the industry, and hopefully to inspire conversations with other people to do the same. And it's designed to appeal to all ages, all different practitioners within the field and stages of career. So I just wanted to share that, because I feel that is also part of the paradigm shift that I believe we're all in, and helping us maybe to begin to make different choices. And I think that is probably, I would also just add that, you know, as part of that, I would also see, you know, that climate cultures and EcoStage and all these other initiatives, I almost feel like could be considered revolutionary, is that when one person is making a choice, it's one; when 2, it gathers volition, and when you get a whole load of people doing it, that is when you get the paradigm shift. And I guess I just add that is, you know, part of my dream, that this happens for us all.
Brilliant. All right, great, thank you, Andrea.